Coming up on this episode of In Your Mind.
This is what I always say is I'm not here to be anybody's teacher, period. End of story. And I really decide on how much energy I'm giving to things because I've done this for a while now where like sometimes people will comment things on my Instagram or on my Facebook or wherever. And I have to decide really quickly, is this worth the energy? Annabel Garcia Torres, and I have a podcast called Latinx on the Rise. I also am a podcast producer at On the Rise Media, and I have a few podcasts that I produce under there.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of In Your Mind with your host, me, Paul Andres. So I am beyond excited to have our guest here today. And so please guys, help me welcome Annabel. Annabel, how are you?
I'm really, really good. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for coming. I mean, I moved to San Diego, August of 2019, I think. So not long ago, right? Like it's barely been maybe a year. And I started following you and your podcast maybe like a month before I even moved to, like it was a while. Like I've been following you at least for a year. You had already started and you're established, but you were just really pushing issues that obviously mattered to anyone who's Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, right? Like you were pushing these issues that I felt like people often overlooked. And I don't know, like it was just inspiring, honestly. Like I that's why I had to follow, because I was like, it's insane that you're young and you're pushing these issues. Like I feel like that's not always the case. And so I couldn't help but follow. And like ever since following, I feel like it's inspired me to even maybe take a little bit more of a role, right? And like being part of this community and like owning part of that, because I think that's the hard part of anybody, right? And any community and anything is what's your role in it. But you showed me, which is why I'm gushing, I feel like right now, but you're the one that showed me like how to sort of stand in that truth of being, you know, Latino and really owning it. Because I think it was, for me, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in the podcast, it was just a little bit of a struggle being biracial and can you and can't you, and is it okay and is it not, right? Like it's okay with these people, but then these ones are not okay. So yeah, but I'm already getting too ahead of myself because I'm just that excited that you're here. So thank you for being.
Well, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, no, I mean, you're the busy lady, right? Running all these businesses with podcasts and then your own, and it's doing amazing. You guys were featured on the Hispanic Heritage Month
Yes, for iTunes. Yeah, we were. So that was really exciting.
Yeah. Okay, so I know I'm already like asking all these questions, but generally the rule is I have one question I start with and one question I end with, and then the middle is just for us to play. So
okay, yeah.
First question, and I ask the same thing to everybody, but tell us a little bit about Annabel as a little girl.
Oh, as a little girl, I like that question a lot. I was definitely one of the youngest. You know, I was the youngest child of my family for 7 years before my little sister came and invaded. But I really was like very imaginative. My siblings were just old enough that they were spending time more at school and with their friends. I mean, my older sister is only 4 years older than I am. But as a little kid, I was being taken care of by a babysitter most of the time because my mom and my dad both worked. And my mom would work 2 or 3 jobs and in factories, and my dad worked construction. So construction, he would be gone all day. So I spent a lot of time with babysitters, and I spent a lot of time alone with babysitters. So I was really like imaginative and playful and like rambunctious. I think I definitely had a big personality in a teeny tiny little body. And And yeah, I think that was me as a little kid.
And where do you think you picked up the drive and sort of the courage that you have now?
I think for my parents, because both of my parents really were like always very much like, if you want something, you have to work for it. For example, like when I was in high school, everybody had a cell phone, right? And it was just around that time where cell phones were like beginning to kind of have style to them. Like you had the Sidekick, and you had all these different types of phones, and I just wanted one. And my parents said, okay, if you want one, you have to get a job. And I was 15. So no real place would hire me.
Yeah.
So I went to a family friend who was an acupuncturist, and my sister had worked for him before. And I said, hey, can I come in and work 2 days a week or 3 days a week? And he said, yes. I was a terrible receptionist. I had no idea what I was doing. And this is even before we had computers. So like everything was by the books, and I had to tally up. Oh my God, I remember I had to tally up the money at the end of the night, and I was horrible at math. And I would always get the books wrong. Every night I would get the books wrong. But I think that experience at a young age, at 15, getting handed a paycheck, it was like I was getting paid $7 an hour. So when I would get my like $200 in like 2 weeks or a month, or how whenever I would get my money, and I could go and do literally whatever I wanted with that money, I was like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. And so I think that was where the drive was born. If I can make money, I can do whatever I want.
Yes. And tell everyone, where did you grow up and where do you live now?
So I was born in Chicago, but because of like there was a lot of gang violence at the time, so my parents moved us out to the suburbs. And that was really great. It was a very interesting, different type of childhood. I feel like my older siblings really had that young childhood in the city. Yeah. And then I had that young childhood in the suburbs. So for me, I was the only person of color for a long time in my school. So it just felt really different. I felt different. I knew I was different. I knew it was because I was brown and because I was Mexican that, I was always feeling a little different. So I don't know, that's kind of where I grew up. I think it definitely shaped sort of my outlook on having to form such a strong self-identity, because people are always going to tell you who you are and what you should be. And it's important to decide daily who you are. And then I moved back to Chicago, and then now in LA.
Awesome. What made you do the jump to the West Coast?
I really wanted to pursue more of a career in broadcasts. And at the time in Chicago, I couldn't see it clearly. And even though I could do this in Chicago, this really wasn't born for me until I came to LA.
Got it. What was your inspiration?
I had thought about creating a podcast I had thought about creating like a blog or something called Latinx on the Rise. And at first it was Latinos on the Rise. And then it evolved to Latinx on the Rise. And it was really after like I had an interesting experience. I went to Lush, the store in Chicago. And we had always been talking about this word Latinx in my work because I was working as a teacher. I had taught ESL for 4 years, and it was all adults. And I taught citizenship classes and English. So at the time, I was working for the MacArthur Foundation on a pilot program, which is really interesting because it's so much being used now. It was a hybrid class. It was a hybrid English class where we would do online and in person. Wow. So it was really interesting. But I had gone to Lush, and I needed help with something. And the clerk there kept on referring to me as they. And at first, I was like, that's kind of rude. Like, why would she just call me they? Like, I'm right here, And it wasn't until I left that experience that I realized, oh, It's because I never said, my pronoun is she, or you can call me by she, you know? And I thought to myself, that situation of me being called they made me feel uncomfortable. Is that how every time a person who's not gender conforming feels every time that they're assumed a gender? And for me, like Latinx clicked. And I was like, this is why it makes sense, because it's not about me. It's not about how I feel or if I feel comfortable associating with a genderless pronoun. It's about how other people would feel. And so then that's when I really was like, okay, I really, really want to pursue Latinx on the rights. I really want to pursue it. But at the time, I really didn't know how to do that. And so it didn't really come into a podcast form until 2018. And I interviewed my friend. I had really a small handful or a handful of friends out here in LA. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to interview my friends, and then I'm going to have them recommend people that I totally would never interact with on a normal day-to-day basis. And every person that I interviewed, I asked them to recommend another person. And it was just like my networks flew open. I had access to people who I would absolutely never have access to, with great recommendations, to interview them. And so for me, that was an amazing experience, because I've been able to immerse myself in networks and in groups with people that I would absolutely never have the opportunity to in the past.
That's amazing. I mean, man, that story is good. You're good at this one. Good at that. I guess I do want to help the audience too, like explain to them essentially like, what does Latinx mean? And then the like Latino versus Hispanic, and help them.
Sure. So Hispanic, it's attributed to mostly countries it is attributed to Spanish-speaking countries. So that includes Spain, and it excludes places like Belize, Brazil, Guyana, I think it is. So it excludes those countries, even though those countries are in Latin America. But it includes majorly Spain. That's my husband. Who's going to get to work, I guess. But then Latino as a term refers to Latin American countries. So this includes Brazil, it includes Belize, et cetera, except for Latino is always the default. So this is a male masculine pronoun. If there's a group of women, they are Latinas. If there is a group of women and a man enters, it is automatically, these are Latinos. And I've heard people starting to use the word Latine. I've heard a lot of people obviously very annoyed with the word Latinx. And to me, language is always going to develop. Right now, it's Latinx. And maybe tomorrow it's Latine. I know that a lot of people are starting to use it. But it's about having the ability to change the pronoun and change the gender specifics of a language, which is amazing. I think that the fact that we're able to mess with language so much is interesting and fun. I've heard a lot of people say, like, we should decolonize our language, which I totally understand, but that's even more difficult because most of us don't speak native languages. And also, who wins in the decolonized game? Is it the what that wins? Are we going to be speaking Mexique? Or like, what is the one that wins in the native languages? And then are we all supposed to learn it? I think it would be wonderful, and there's awesome resources to learn native languages for free. And I highly recommend them if people really want to do that. But I think it's important to also build off of what we've been given. This is what we've inherited, right? It's a little bit of a mess. We don't really want to associate with Spain, but we can take what we have here and we can just build on top of it and sort of force change out of what we have here.
I guess the thought process you have, and I know you attribute it to the experience you had at Lush, but even just for you to recognize that, I mean, like, the question I guess I have is, how did you know to recognize that? Like, it's very hard. I always tell people like to explain, hey, this is my experience, right? Or, hey, did you notice that that happened? Especially if they have never experienced what that is. And often there's a racial thing that happened or a prejudice. If they've never experienced that themselves, they don't look for it, or it's just not in their view. So they don't ever recognize it. And so for you to recognize this, gender nonconforming idea and then go with that, I guess, like, where did that come from? Because I feel like that isn't super common in the, Latin community as a whole all the time. So it's like, I would love to hear like how that was sort of like awoken in you.
I think it's like two separate things. One is there's this, my favorite quote is I can't even remember who it's by because it's like a Greek person or like a Roman person. It was an old school quote, and it's basically translates to, anything that's human is not alien to me. So for me, it's like I can always put myself in the perspective of even the most evil person on the planet to the most amazing, wonderful person. They're not unachievable. That person is not so different from who I am. We're basically the same. But then also experiences. So I think with teaching specifically, that taught me a lot about language specifically. I remember I had a Salvadorian student, and she was awesome. And I remember one day, you know how you flippantly say things like, I hate this or I hate that, and I'm guilty of it to this day. But she said to me, why do you use that word, hate? Why do you use it so much? She said, think about it in Spanish. How many times do you say naturally, oh, yo odio esto? I hate this. And I thought, well, I never really used that word. Mm-hmm. So for me, like during that teaching experience, I got so much for my students. For me, it wasn't like they were my students. To me, it was a mutual teaching benefit sort of situation. Yeah. And for me, it was an opportunity to constantly put myself in other people's shoes. Because to me, sometimes things are so easy. I had a student who, at the time that I was teaching him English, was in his 30s, was married, had children. And we had to do a lot of reflecting back at their childhood and sort of their immersion into the United States and the culture. And he told me how he had come here when he was in his teens and he went to go live with his father. But then his father got remarried and kicked him out of the house by the time he was 14. And so he had to go find an apartment and find a job. So I constantly had to do exercises in my mind to put myself in this person's position so that I don't say things like, oh, it's okay, or something very, I guess, disrespectful, or like I wasn't really connecting. So I think that's probably where I sort of built in that little, like, let me think how they're thinking.
I love that. This is like, now we're going to take a left turn, but are you like a spiritual woo-woo LA West Coast type of person, or are you something else?
I think sometimes I'm woo-woo and then sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm like, ugh. LA woo-woo is at another level. So I'm like more practical about my woo-woo-ness.
So like it's weird because when you're explaining that story and just like, especially how you're able to put yourself in it, like that's something that I've always, like since I was young, and I would always say, oh, it's because I had really intense anxiety. And so I thought I was so anxious and worried about everything that I would then, it was easy for me to jump into like both people's perspectives. And most of the time it was because I was sitting there trying to really analyze what was being said by both people to then see, is what they're saying actually what they mean? Like, what words weren't they using? What does their body language say versus what they're saying out loud? How does it affect me? Is it critical? Like, really, that's where it came from. But I started getting into the woo-woo of the West Coast. And started seeing an energy healer essentially like pretty regularly for like 8 years. And I mean, I tell everyone, like, to me, it was like therapy, really. Like, we just sat there most of the time. And she, though, sort of connected with like, oh, no, like that was like your perspective. And she obviously related to a lot of things like your sun sign and a lot of stuff. But it's rare. It's funny because like I've met a few other people who do exactly what you do. You can put yourself in another person's perspective. And it seems natural to me. So like this conversation seems like easy, like, oh, cool, I get it. I didn't realize how unnatural and how foreign it feels for someone who literally cannot do that or hasn't learned, I guess, to do that. Until more recently, I've met a few people that were just like, how could you ever relate? I've never lived it, so I could never. It was just such a hard concept for them to understand. And so I love that you're a person that is like that, because it feels sort of rare. It's like this, like I was just literally at dinner the other night and we were talking about this with a friend of mine. I was like, it's like our superpower to be like see other people's perspectives, because I didn't realize how hard it was for people to honestly do that, because it makes it confusing, I think, too. And I think that maybe that's why people stay away. It does get sometimes a little confusing. We can see both sides without
Well, I think it's also so much easier to analyze and process your own feelings through things. Like, trust me, there are times where I've had conversations with people that I don't want to understand their perspective,
yeah.
you know, and I'm not going to want to understand their perspective. And I can easily block that out. And I can easily think like, oh, I don't know what they were thinking. Or, you know, if you get in an argument with your siblings or whatever, you don't want to put yourself in their perspective. So you can easily block those little, let me be compassionate for a second. But more often than not, it really gives you a big explanation, and it makes it easier to understand people too.
Yeah.
Because it's tough to understand people.
I think it also makes it more, you can be more strategic and more effective in communicating, and sort of, I think, even, I don't like to say debating or negotiating, but it's like getting your point across. If I can understand where that person's coming from, or at least some idea of what they're coming from, it's a lot easier for me to then fight that point, right? Because it's like, and see if I can that sounds horrible.
Tear them down.
I mean, I just like, when I'm thinking of it, I'm just thinking of like the president, because but you know, like it's like there are plenty of people that we don't need to see or want to see their perspectives.
Well, and just to kind of bounce off that, that's the only time that I've really had a hard time putting myself in other people's perspective. Like, I don't understand. And here's the thing, I don't understand the support for him, but I am so desperate to understand. Because I like things making sense to me.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't make sense, it's almost like it's never happened before, you know? I always, whenever I'm trying to figure something out and someone knows better than I do, I'll always say, can you help me understand? Instead of, can you do this for me? Or I always say, can you help me understand? Because I want to believe that I can understand not only things, but then also people. So for me, not being able to see that or not being able to understand that element of desire or support, it's scary to me that I don't understand it or I don't see it.
That word that you used is exactly how I would describe it. It is scary. It's not confusing. It's not, oh man, I'm not that good. It is scary. That idea that you can't understand why people do. I mean, it's true, and I hate to make it about this person, but I can't, you're right. I cannot understand why people would support this person, actually seeing the facts of all these things that he does and the things that he says, which are complete opposite of what actually happens, and all the things happening behind the scenes. And I mean, it's mind-blowing. And so when I do meet people, or when I learn, which is, I never used to be a person that would be like, delete friend list, delete friend. Like, I wasn't that person. I was just like,
me either.
Your personal thing, I'll do mine. We can all coexist. But for some reason, and I don't know if I'm just buying into the divisiveness or what, but for some reason, there is something about that when it's like, no, you're just going to blindly support. And people are posting. I've turned into that person now, because I'm like, I just can't look on my phone and see the hate that you're helping spread, although you're trying to say that it's not hate. Like, I don't know. It's like, it's a scary time right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I had a hard time too, because I really truly believe that I should never be in an echo chamber. I should always have somebody around me that disagrees with me, because it's interesting. Like, it's not interesting to constantly agree with people and have the same perspective. It's not interesting at all.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to have people who disagree with you and make good points, because it makes you question your own beliefs. But with where I did change my perspective on deleting was that there was like a lot of really weird, bizarre posts going around for a while about Joe Biden being. Stretch your legs. There was weird, bizarre. Is my Alexa? There was weird, bizarre posts going around about Joe Biden being a pedophile, and really graphic stuff started going around. And so there, I started deleting people, because I thought, okay, we've lost reason somewhere. We've lost it. But there are a lot of Trump supporters that are in my family, and there are a lot of Trump supporters that I'm still friends with on social media. But mostly they don't sort of come out and say it, you know? They'll post things, but they won't really say anything. And they won't even post like in support of Trump. They'll just post things that are sort of passively under the radar, you know, subliminal. And I mean, hey, I feel comfortable supporting who I support with Joe Biden and Harris. I feel like it should be across the board. Everyone should feel comfortable and be able to say who they support. If you can't accept the consequences, I think if somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you know, Joe Biden's a pedophile," accused or alleged, right? I would be easily. I could tell them like, "No, you're wrong."
Yes.
And I could prove why you're wrong. But with Trump, it's like you should be able to also prove why you have, support for him. If you think that your support is legitimate, then you should be able to legitimately be able to hold case for that.
I agree, and I think I found it's similar. Like I have a lot of way more friends actually than I honestly could have guessed that were leaning obviously in that direction. And most of them, for the most part, they do what they want to do. I do wish that they would be maybe more vocal, because I think I like you said, I don't want to be in that echo chamber. For me, that's the only way I grow. It's also the only way I have fun, when I'm challenged and I can think. So I want the people to do that. But what happened, and the reason I had to delete people, which I've never done before, was in the conversation, if someone would bring it up or say something and I could question, just like they've questioned me, it really quickly just started not being about facts, honestly. Like, it wasn't about facts, or it wasn't about issues. It immediately just turned into like, you're sensitive, or it just went in such a weird way, like fast too. And so I was like, dude, I don't.
Because there's no defense in it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, okay, I say that people should be able to, say and really defend and appropriately sort of stand by their morals or stand by their support of Donald Trump. But the reality is that when you're standing on quicksand, there's only one direction you're going to go. And then that's when it turns into personal. And so if I'm attacked personally, I think I'm like everybody on the internet. And if I'm attacked personally, I'm going to attack again personally. And it's like, then it turns into, instead of policies and actually things that have gotten done, it turns into, you're dumb. No, I'm dumber. Who's the dumbest here?
I mean, I can think of one off the top of my head where they were talking about being a kid, and like, I'm like, we're the same age, I'm 35, so you're around my age. And they're like, what people are saying about racism is just, there's no racism. I don't know what people are talking about. It was just such a crazy thing to me that this person was saying there was no racism, and his defense was because his hero was Michael Jordan and he's white, and because his favorite TV show was Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and he's white. Like, I was like, what?
Mm.
I don't even, that was one of those times where I'm like, I'm trying really hard. I do not understand how those two relate.
And then there's going to be those people that you're not. This is what I always say is I'm not here to be anybody's teacher, period. End of story. And I really decide on how much energy I'm giving to things, because I've done this for a while now, where like sometimes people will comment things on my Instagram or on my Facebook or wherever. And I have to decide really quickly, is this worth the energy? And I remember, I forget what we were specifically talking about. I think I had posted something about like Jesus being Black. And there was someone trying to argue with me about the fact that, well, what does it matter if his skin was Black? You know, it's about the messaging. And really quickly, he started saying that no one here believes in Jesus. Okay. And it was like a interaction I think I spent like a half an hour on. And then it was like 9 o'clock in the morning too. And I thought to myself, because he messaged me back after like going back and forth. And I thought, it's 9 a.m. I have a lot of stuff to do. I could stay on this and spend time here, or I could just delete him and just move on with my life. And that's what I ended up doing. For me, everything is about time.
Mm.
Am I going to sit here? Is this worth my time? Is the time exchange worth it? If I spend a half an hour arguing with somebody about whether or not Jesus was Black, like, it's not worth my time, because it matters what I believe and not what this other person believes. Yeah. Their belief structure isn't going to influence or change mine. So goodbye. Like, I'm not going to spend time on you. And that's it.
One of the things that I've always admired about you is that you live really openly online, right?
Yeah.
And you share a lot about your experiences and yourself. And this, like, for me, this is all new. Talking about politics, no joke, not until this year. Like, I've used to own a large real estate company. I still own a couple businesses, but it was always like no politics, no religion, no, just that old school mentality of like, stay away. And so that's how I lived. But I actually moved to San Diego because all of that started to not feel aligned. I mean, this is the woo-woo in me. It was aligning anymore. And I felt like this, like, oh man, I'm so tired of like living this life where I have to hide a piece of me at all times, whether it's like being little and gay or being in this community and being like, well, I can look white, so I can just pretend I'm just like Italian, or, I don't know, like something, or like then I go over here and have to be like, no, I'm Mexican because it's my family, and push the other part away. Like, it was just always something, and whether it's politics, race, and I wanted to not do that. And so that's, I think, honestly, like subconsciously, like how I started finding like you and just other people to like look up to, in a sense of like, how do they just put this out there like that, right? Like, how do they put their story and who they are out there? Because it was scary to me. And I remember seeing a post you did where I think you were explaining a time you were at a bar in Chicago. A man hit you. Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I'm not trying to bring this up to trigger or relive anything. I'm just like, I remember listening to that, and I just could not get that out of my head for days. And that, and honestly, it wasn't even that. It was like what you had said, like, I think you talked to your brother or somebody, and you were like, this happened, and they questioned you. And I just was like, I mean, I still think about it, and I'm about like, I could like legit like get emotional right now, because I'm like, I cannot believe that fucking happened. And then I couldn't believe that you would share. I was like, it was just it was so much. And it was, I hate that I keep using this word, but it was inspiring. Like, I could not believe that you would share that, because there's things that have happened that I was like, I'll never let anyone know. And then I started thinking like, but look how what you impacted me in such a big way just by sharing that maybe we should be sharing more.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I definitely wasn't comfortable.
Yeah.
And for those listening and who may not have heard that story, it was, I was giving 3 separate examples. I forget what had triggered this for me, like what event, something had happened. I forget what. And I shared 3 separate stories. I think it was when AOC was sort of belittled for just kind of being like a silly woman or something.
Yes.
I don't know. And I think it was something about, something had been trending about like violence for women. I'm not entirely sure. But I shared 3 separate stories about being hit by men, 3 different occasions. And I mean, those were hard to live through. And I think that when you live through it and you get to a point like now, it's been years since the last time that happened. And you sort of start, it's kind of weird. Like, you know, it happened to you, but you don't associate it like so tenderly to yourself anymore, you know? And for me, posting that, it was a little bit awkward because I consider everybody who watches my stories or who watches or is on my Instagram, I consider people on their friends, you know? So it's a little bit embarrassing to be like, this is what happened to me, you know? Because I do feel like that might be a little bit too much, you know? Anxiety is something that I have a hard time talking about because I get anxious just talking about anxiety, but I have a severe anxiety disorder. But all of those things, it's not like I approach them and I think like, I'm so chill about this subject. Like, I definitely feel awkward. I definitely feel like, oh my God. And I always show my husband stuff and I'm like, is this too much? Is this okay? Like, what do you think? Because sometimes I will go off the rails, like either politically or whatever. And he's like, no, you're being too mean. Or he'll say, maybe don't say it that way because it kind of sounds a little like, aggressive or whatever it is. And he does it in my benefit because he knows that like ultimately it's about also protecting me and like how much I want to share. But I think what makes it easy for me to share stuff is because I do consider people on my online, like I consider everybody just like a friend. So I just assume like it's like talking to a friend.
Yeah. I mean,
it might make me a little delusional.
There's like, I was just on a podcast the other day and they were asking me like, hey, how did you get started? Why do you do this now? Right. And the whole point of this show is there's like a big thing, like my goal, and then here's the pitch that you tell people. It's like the pitch is like, yeah, we're telling people stories, right? And uncovering their truths on, feeling how they were able to feel at home now with who they've become. And I think that's beautiful and it's amazing. My big goal is that by telling these stories, by meeting people that are different or like have different thoughts and ideas and different experiences, there is someone out there. Like, I want there to be someone out there that accidentally happened upon the show that is like, don't even hate this. I don't know, or don't hate whatever, Hispanic people, Latin people, the gay people, whatever. But then hear this and forget because they don't see me or whatever, like they're listening to it and then realize, oh crap, I had the same thought or a same experience or something that sparks something in them to now start thinking, wait, I'm not supposed to like them, but why did I just relate to them? Because I think that spark is what changes people. And I always call it like this journey from like I to we. Like that's I think we should all go, is like, how do we become we? But that's my hope. And that interview, when they were talking to me and saying, why do you do this? It's crazy. This is crazy. But it's like, I think of you, and there is a human rights campaign speech. And it was a young guy who was talking about his coming out story. Listen to that story and then listen to you tell the story that you just told within 24 hours. And something about that, both of those stories coming together, I felt like, I mean, my person tells me I cuss too much on this, so I need to hold it. Like, I felt so like, whoa, like someone, and it was 2 people, but still like, it felt just like the story got told that felt so close to mine that had never been told before. And it felt like actually felt like I related to both of you. Like I've never related to other people before because no one ever has like talked to me in that way, even though you weren't talking directly at me. But even that experience where you're saying like, yeah, I'm not a woman, but like, you know, I hate saying it out loud. I still do, but still like, you know, yeah, I got taken advantage of when I was young and came out and lived alone. And I've never talked about it until just recently. And it is because I saw you talk about your story and like, even like things that have happened to me that were growing up racist that I tried to push away and say that wasn't,
Mm.
because I was so scared of like, I don't want to say it because then I know I don't look Latin enough, or I don't want to say it because then if I don't know, it's just like this weird idea that I think, and I've talked to a lot of people that are biracial. It's like you're trying to play this field, and in usually in school you're forced just for survival to like pick one or the other. And I, much like you, like I grew up in a heavy migrant only area, so everything's sort of English and Spanish. I mean, like my favorite food growing up was at Dairy Queen, and it's their burritos, which no one else had because it was just so Hispanic in where we live. And so like my grandpa and grandma didn't speak English, like we grew up speaking Spanish, like that felt norm. And then my parents, because it was not also the safest, it was a lot of gangs and shootings, and they sent me to a private school. And I was like one of literally like 5 or 6 kids that all of us got bussed in, which was actually just an old van that the school had to take them to school. And I learned quickly that they were the scholarship kids.
Mm.
Like the minute, like my name is Paul Andres, the minute they heard my name was Paul, they all were like Pablo, because you're the Mexican bus, right? Like
Yeah.
I just went with it, and I didn't even think, oh, that's just them. I thought that was just them being friendly, like, oh, I got a nickname. But actually it was not. Like that's not what the intention really was, right?
Yeah.
It's just like all that stuff. But hearing you say your story and then seeing how much you push for the issues that people never hear about or that don't get the same airtime, or I don't know, like I told you from the beginning, I feel like all I'm doing this whole time is gushing, but it's because like you were one of those key people that I can like pinpoint and say, that person is one of the reasons I'm doing this. Like it's insane to me to be talking to you.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing this because I think for me, one of the things like you're saying that you know you really want somebody who may be white and doesn't like Latinos to stumble upon your podcast and be like, oh, okay, I can relate to this. For me, it was much more the reason that I started the podcast was because I wanted Latinos and all those who fit under the umbrella of Latinx, Hispanic, Latino, Latine, not to get upset or like have their ruffled feathers about the word Latinx because so many people have that, but I really wanted it to be a space where people could get encouraged to just find that self-identity. I don't really think that identifying with a single word or, I think there's not a monolith of Latinos, right? We say this all the time. It's a tiresome thing to say, except for the fact that in a lot of Latino communities, you still have this concept that we must be a monolith. Like, there's the kids who grew up in low income neighborhoods, right? We would say, oh, they're ghetto. Okay, we have kids who grew up in white neighborhoods. We would say that they are wanting to be white. We have kids who grew up in Latin America and now migrated to the United States. What would we say about them? Oh, they're the pure most Latino that they could be, but then they wouldn't associate with being Latino. They would associate with being Colombian, Venezuelan, Mexican, whatever it is. And then you have the kids here who are like now adults who maybe don't speak Spanish or they're 4th, 5th generation and they still are associating it as Latinos. I think that there's so much interpolicing that is a huge problem that I see because, and I try my best not to do this and not to let it affect me either, because there's a lot of time that I'm like, oh my God, I'm not Latina enough. Like I am failing at being a Latina. But it really is about and it's hard to achieve this thought process because it's like, it's really about what you dictate is Latino or Latina or Latinx. Like whatever it is that you think that is the standard.
Mm-hmm.
And no one can tell you otherwise. But it's hard. I remember I got kind of geeked out about going to see Mana, right? I went to go see them. I went to go see them live. I got to meet some of the band members. So I was like, wow, this is so cool. And somebody said to me, Mana is not that cool. And to me, it made me feel like, and at the moment I didn't say anything, but it made me feel like kind of like, I don't know, insecure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what the right feeling was. But how many times has a person who's, you know, like white passing, for example, been told, oh, you're just white, like you're not Latino. Okay. Oh, you don't speak Spanish? Oh, you cannot be Latinx. You know what I mean? Like there's so many times that we've self-policed. And for me, it's like so important that people give themselves a space to decide who they are. We're told all the time, this is what you are, this is where you belong, this is your box, and check here, please. And we are busy people. We don't have all the time for all the self-exploration in the world, but it is something for me where every single day I encounter these thoughts, where every single day I have to reassure myself of who I am. And a lot of the times I do fall off balance. And I do feel that the feeling of not being Latina enough, or, you know, oh, maybe I used the wrong word in Spanish or whatever it is, or I missed a date, you know. I remember for Hispanic Heritage Month, it kicked off on, I think, the 16th of September.
Mm.
And I was up late editing, and it wasn't until I heard one of the podcasts that I edit talking about it that I was like, oh, crap, I have to do something for this. Mm. And so it's in those moments where it's like I feel insecure about myself and I feel like, damn, I'm failing. Mm. But it's hard because it's really only up to ourselves to re-encourage ourselves, reinvigorate ourselves, and tell ourselves like, no, you're fine. You're fine. And everybody feels this way. And some days are better than others, but that self-identity is so important because that way no one can ever make you second guess. No one can ever tell you who you are or what label you belong to or whether or not you are enough of something because you've already decided what you are. You could just tell them like, actually, no, thank you so much for your input. Not needed. Yeah. Not needed.
I'm telling you, like the way you explain things, the attitude, the funniness, like the relatability, it made it totally possible for me to even think I could get on camera, let alone tell people about who I was and my story. So like, thank you for being that person because it's really, and I know it's not just me. I've introduced so many friends and family to like Latinx on the Rise just so that they could follow and see. And even the work.
Thank you.
Yeah, like, so it's like, I know it's not just me. There's other people that have been like so into it. So that's awesome. We went off on a lot. And it's my fault because I do this to everyone. But I do want to make sure, because I have a couple of things I want to make sure we at least end with. And the first thing is tell everyone real quick what's coming up for you and how they can get a hold and follow you.
So I have a lot of stuff coming out. So I have an entire series on COVID and how it's affecting the Latinx community. My second part with my interview with Marumora Villalpando, she is a part of La Resistencia. We talked all about medical malpractice in the detention centers. So the second part of that interview is coming out this week on Thursday. But then outside of that, I interviewed essential workers. I interviewed healthcare workers, doctors. I've interviewed people who are COVID survivors. And another student who really sticks out to me, he was a high school student. He was in his senior year when coronavirus hit. And his mom is a single mom. She lost her job. So when that happened, he had to get a job. So he was working 40 hours a week. He was doing virtual learning, finishing up his high school career. He was 5th in his class when the pandemic hit. By the time it ended, he fell to 13th. He couldn't attend his own graduation because he was working. So it just shows you like how we really have been affected differently. And it tells you really the story of how as Latinos we still persevere, like no matter what is on our table, we still persevere. And you can follow me at Latinx on the Rise, at Latinx on the Rise on Instagram and Twitter. And then email, you can always email me at Annabel@latinxontherise.com.
I love that. And I do have a final question for you.
Sure.
As I said, like, you've done so much, you've accomplished so much in such a short amount of time too, really. Like it's awesome. We started with you telling us a little bit about you as a little girl. And so I always like to sort of, close the story, make it a circle. If that little girl were here today, what do you think you'd want to tell her?
Oh, oh man, that's gonna make me cry. I would tell her that, no matter what happens, because a lot will happen, it's okay. You're going to be okay. You'll make it to another day. There will be people who love you and that support you. And don't be afraid. And don't go on any roller coasters.
Well, I love you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us. Like,
I love you. Thank you, Paul.
I'm like, I love it. Like, I'm gonna rewatch this over and over again. But you guys, we will link everything for Annabel here on video. You'll see, and in comments. Please make sure follow, subscribe. You do not want to miss being a part of Latinx on the Rise and watching her journey, because it is beautiful and amazing. So again, Annabel, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your time.
Oh, yes, anytime. And you guys, we will see you next week. See you guys. Bye.